I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
So I'm really excited to have James Hong on the podcast. You might not know James specifically, but he started the infamous site hotornot.com along with his friend Jim Young. I just want to provide a little intro before fully welcoming James, but Hot or Not was like the dream site to build, I would imagine. Basically, imagine setting up a website and then weeks later you have millions of users, you minimal costs, and it turns into a business. That's kind of the dream. And James, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, what was it like? You set up this site, and I'll describe the site in a second, but you set up the site, and did you realize you were going to have 2 million visitors within weeks?
No, it was mainly, we put it up really as a joke. It was just for fun. It was just kind of an experiment. My friend and I, we were hopeful, but we really didn't expect it to happen. I don't know if you remember this, but back then there was this whole concept of viral marketing was kind of new, and I was kind of obsessed with this guy called the Turkish Stud. I don't know if you know who he is.
No, and to be fair, this was in the year 2000, right?
This was in 2000, but I think Mahir, the Turkish Stud, happened in 99. Huh. There was this guy who had a webpage. Actually, someone took his webpage and made another webpage about him that was kind of a joke. It grew like crazy, and if you know Borat, I think Borat might have been based on him, actually.
That's funny. We
were just amused because Jim and I, because we were in Silicon Valley where there were all these companies spending millions of dollars to get 10 users, and at the same time, here was this guy who had a website made about him, and he ended up on Letterman and all these TV shows. And we just thought it was kind of funny because this guy didn't do anything, and he had all these users come to his site. And meanwhile, there are all these people spending money who couldn't get, even a few people to their site. And so we just thought that was really interesting and really cool. So we were obsessed by him, and we kind of took it upon ourselves as a challenge to say, could we ever create a Mahir, a Turkish Stud? And so we were always bouncing around ideas. And one day we just came up with the idea for Hot or Not, and this could be it. Who knows? So we just built it, and pretty quickly. It was both a blessing and also a curse to have something grow that quickly, especially back in 2000 when things were a lot actually more expensive than they are today.
And to be clear, so Hot or Not was people uploaded their photos. Very simple concept. People uploaded their photos, and then you could choose whether they were hot or not. essentially.
Basically, people submitted their photos for other people to judge them, to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. A few months later, we also added a dating site where if you thought they were hot, you could meet them, and that basically worked how Tinder works. It was kind of the first speed dating on. You clicked yes or no instead of swiping left or right, but it was effectively the same thing.
Well, and you were kind of the ancestor of many sites. I mean, Facebook came out of Face Mash that Mark Zuckerberg set up. You hosted Twitter for a while. You hosted BitTorrent. The YouTube guys were inspired by you. They wanted to do like a hot or not of videos.
Yeah.
I have a confession for you. I set up a site called Smart or Stupid based on your site. Nobody really used it. I had people upload their photo and then fill out an IQ form. And you had to decide if you thought they were smart or not. And then you would see the results of their IQ test.
That's actually pretty cool. I like that. Some of my best friends, like I don't know if you know Philip Kaplan, who back to Pud, who ran Fuck Company. He also created a hot or not copycat of sorts, as did Greg Tseng of Tagged and the guys who did Machine Zone, one of the biggest gaming companies now, started off. I mean, and like I said, some of my best friends also did it. It's just kind of a quirky concept, and it was an interesting UI, I think.
But it didn't really work. Like for me, at least, it didn't really work. Like, what do you think contributed to the instant success of Hot or Not? And obviously, I guess the curse you're talking about was, storage costs and space and things like that, or what were the issues right then?
Well, the interesting thing about Hot or Not versus, say, Smart or Not is that it kind of tapped into something that we as human beings, it taps into our inner selves of, everyone is always rating people. It's just kind of a instinctive thing. And so it kind of touches something that's kind of a core function. Because of that, it really strikes a nerve. Like, I don't go around looking at guys or girls saying, "Oh, I wonder if they're smart or not."
Right.
Smart or not is actually quite funny and actually quite interesting, because from a psychology standpoint, there's something about hotness that just made it more exciting, and that's how our society is. We're very, I don't know, sexual beings. So
well, and it's very blunt, because the reality is it's almost a cliche. Like, you were two electrical engineers, so of course you're going to want women to upload photos and have everybody decide whether they're hot or not. Like, I'm sure you were accused of like sexism at the time. Sexism
actually didn't end up being much of a problem, because it turned out that 2/3 of the people who submitted their picture were men. So if you were going to accuse us of sexism and of superficiality, it would actually be in the opposite direction of we're being superficial and sexist against men more than women. So
that's interesting. Like, so did people upload their photos kind of wondering for themselves what people would choose?
I think for a very small percentage of people, it was enlightening. But in reality, most of us already know how hot we are in society. Because, like I said, this is something that people do to us every day. I could go out onto the playground into a high school cafeteria or in college or just going outside to a bar. It's not like I don't know if I'm hot or not. It's something that most people actually know. That the only people who I think it was a surprise for were the people who were somehow so egotistical that they thought that they were hot, but they actually weren't.
See, I would have no problem, because I would be like a 1 or a 2 on hot or not.
The funny thing is that in the beginning, we were a little concerned about hurting people's feelings or, making people feel bad. But what we realized is that, we thought about it. We looked into our user base and found this to actually be true. Kind of much like us, we're not really that hot. It's not like I said, we already kind of knew it, so it wasn't really a surprise. So most people who would submit their pictures that were going to get low scores typically knew it was coming, and so they were confident. Only about 2% of people would actually submit their photos. So those 2% tended to be people who were either knew what was coming or were confident enough that they didn't really care. Like I lived my whole life not being that great looking guy, but I have to make up for it with my personality. My mom says I have a good personality, so and so the type of person who would get a low score on average tended to be able to they were able to brush it off. That's kind of what made them able to even submit in the first place.
So was the score skewed more towards 10 because generally, I guess, hot people were more inclined to submit their photos?
In the beginning, no. In the beginning, it was a broad cross-section, but I would say that we probably retained people who were hotter on average. It's became kind of like a dopamine hit to get
Right.
to check your score. So I would say that we were not in the business of sourcing hotter people, but we are definitely in the business of accumulating them.
And how did people initially even hear about the site, or is it just pure magic?
We built the site over the course of a week, kind of casually, actually. It wasn't really a thing. I was working on another project and my partner was doing his PhD. So it was kind of half-time building it on the side thing. When we launched it, I sent an email to 42 of my friends. That was around 2 o'clock. And by the end of the day, we had about 30,000 people come to the site.
Did you seed it with any initial photos? Like, did you go to some kind of Russian model site and put up photos?
Well, because otherwise it would be, they would just be looking at me and my partner, and that wouldn't be that interesting. So what we did is we seeded it with 100 photos. I could probably say this now. We seeded it with 100 photos that I just downloaded off of, I think, Excite Personals. I don't remember Excite. But what was pretty awesome was that we had so many pictures coming in that I think we took them we took down all of the fake photos down within, like 7 or 8 hours. Like that night that we launched, we're like, we don't need them anymore. So we took them out pretty quickly.
So a week later, did you realize, okay, my life has now changed in 1 week?
No, like a day later, it was pretty instantaneous because, first of all, we were running the site on a free machine that I got for opening an E-Trade account and depositing $400 into. So it was literally, or $1,000. It was literally like a $300 machine with no memory and nothing. And so that box was quite immediately slammed. So from a technical basis, there was just the fact that like we didn't have the machines to run this site. And back then there was no EC2, there were no cloud services. Back then you had to spend $2,000 a machine on average and $10,000 to get into a racks, in some co-location facility. And, it wasn't like it is today where you can spin something up. You were doing this stuff back then.
Sure.
You remember what it was like. It was very expensive. And actually even bandwidth was, I think it was about $1,000 per megabit per second. So what a DSL line does today would cost thousands of dollars per month. I just remember the very first night, we almost shut the site down because I was in debt from business school. My partner was still in grad school. And I kind of did a back-of-the-hand calculation. I said, hey, Jim, and we were borrowing, by the way, data center space from a friend. So I was like, hey, Jim, at the current rate, we're going to have a bill of about $100,000 a month. And it's doubling every 8 hours.
That's crazy.
So we were very close to shutting it down until, I called a friend of mine and for advice, and he's like, don't you dare shut this thing down. Whatever you do, you can go bankrupt, but, you can't, this opportunity doesn't come, every day. So we're like, okay, fine, we'll have to work through this somehow. So what we did actually is we did two things. For hosting, we moved the machine to my partner's grad school office. So it was very briefly hosted in Berkeley. And
we won't tell Berkeley about that.
Yeah, but before that, they know about it actually. They luckily Jim's advisor was the dean of engineering, and so he gave us he got us off the hook for a couple of days to find an alternative. I'll get to that in a second. But the other thing that we did is we said, hey, why don't we just upload all our images to Yahoo GeoCities and just let Yahoo host them. We did that, and then when users were submitting their photos, instead of saying, hey, upload your photo, we said, hey, go create a GeoCities account, your own GeoCities account, and just give us a URL of the picture. So that basically got rid of our cost of serving the pictures. And interestingly enough, a month later, Yahoo shut down the ability to do that, except they somehow whitelisted Hot or Not. We weren't really sure why, but years later, I ran into the guy who ran GeoCities, and he's like, well, we didn't want to be the guys who killed Hot or Not.
Well, and also, you must have been the only reason people were signing up for GeoCities at that point.
Well, I mean, GeoCities was really popular. They were bought for billions of dollars, I think. So, anyway, we thought we were actually just riding under the noise, under the floor, under the radar. But it turns out that they knew all about us, and we were luckily so since they whitelisted us. But and then actually we took it beyond that. We then contacted Ophoto, which was like one of the first picture sharing sites, it's like Shutterfly. I think Kodak bought them. And we cut a deal with them where we said, hey, instead of sending people to GeoCities, can we send you, our users, we can ask the users if they own a camera, because back then most people didn't own digital cameras. And if they do, then we'll send them to you for photo hosting, and they paid us $1. So we did like an affiliate deal with Ophoto in the early days of affiliate deals, and that actually ended up making us our first money. And luckily, they fronted us $25K, which helped us pay for a lot of our costs up front.
So that's great. So you had no real serious costs if they were handling the major hosting and they were paying you.
Right. You're right. Exactly. That was the Ophoto deal. And then the last real challenge on the hosting stuff was that Berkeley found out about us pretty much instantly. We got a couple of days because of my partner's advisor. For that one, we called Rackspace, which was back then just up and coming and pretty small, actually, relative to today. And I said, hey, you guys are doing really well. You guys are probably going to want to like go public someday. I'm getting all these phone calls from CNET Radio and from Wall Street Journal. Like, how about you host us for free and I'll just talk about you? and because back then our challenge was even if we had the money, we couldn't turn up that, we couldn't meet the demand that quickly because it took the lead time on even getting the machine was, 2 weeks to a month. And our demand was instant, right? And I said, well, hey, this is kind of actually your model. Like you enable people to scale up quickly. And so they said, yeah, that's actually pretty good. So I said, well, scale us quickly. And then they were actually great. This guy, Lou Moorman over there, he said, let's just scale you up quickly, meet the demand, and we'll work out the terms later. So we didn't even work out the terms until I think maybe a month in, which was awesome. And in that time, we just scaled up to, I don't know, maybe up to like 15 to 20 machines. Every night we were just like, add more machines.
That's crazy. This like never happens and is the dream. Like,
yeah, it was definitely, it was a dream, but at the time I think I got 8 hours.
Were you able to sleep? Like, were you stressed?
I literally got 8 hours of sleep the whole week. I slept about an hour a day. And I remember like a week into it, I was just kind of like nodding off and Jim was like looking at me. He's like, dude, you have to get sleep because he says I basically looked like I was about to die.
Okay, let me ask you this. You're in the final stages of kind of the internet bubble, the beginning of the bust. Did you consider immediately flipping it to like a Yahoo for $10 million?
Yeah, actually, we got calls. I remember I think it was Alta Vista offered us $5 million right off the bat.
So you didn't consider that? Like, you've been doing this for 2 weeks and you can make $2.5 million each.
When that happened. That it was not an easy decision to say no to that possibility. But at the same time, we had our friends telling us like this is like they'd never seen anything like this before. This was post bubble crashing though, so because we actually didn't think that this was going to make us money at that point in time. But what we did think it would do was give us instant street cred.
Right.
Before we ran Hot or Not, we had started another company with the two of us and then two of our other friends. And with that previous idea, we had gotten a buyout offer for about $5 or $6 million for the four of us, but we had to stay for 4 years. And we had made the decision to turn that one down because no one wanted to basically sell our youth out for too cheap because we felt like we had the capability to do more.
What'd that company do?
We made that decision before, so it was easier to say no this time because it was maybe doubling of that, but we still felt like you can't buy your youth back. And, we're like, well, we're in our 20s. We'll never have this again. We have to do more. But it was a tough decision, I have to say.
What did that first company do?
It was called DealSpring, originally called Viral Promotions. It was a coupon platform for SMBs where you could create a coupon that would increase in value to the coupon holder if they passed it along to their friends.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so it was like, because the thinking was that Amazon would do all the big box type of products, but there would be a whole class of products like niche products, like say horse saddles or whatever, that would not be, kind of like drop ship type products, more niche products, and that those people tended to get business through word of mouth. So we wanted to create an accelerant for that. It was actually pretty interesting. I found the business plan for that just when I was clearing my stuff out recently, and we had terms in it like the social database, and there are all these things that kind of allude to stuff that's happening now, but we're just way too early.
So Hot or Not, you turned down the offer after like a week or so from Alta Vista. You solved your hosting problem, and then did you just kick back and say, "This is like we're just going to ride this incredible ride"?
No, not exactly. That first year was intense. It was pretty much a whole year of intense work. So after we solved the hosting problems, we still had we still had growth problems in terms of the code and getting it to scale and all that kind of stuff. But also,
because was the site loading slowly because was your database not optimized, or
just to give you an example, the second day I remember on the second day of the site, it took about 30 seconds for a page view to after someone voted on someone, it would take 20 to 30 seconds for the next page view.
Would you get like scared that, oh my gosh, this is going to give us such a bad reputation, people are going to stop going and we're going to be out of business forever?
We weren't even thinking at that point. It was it was more survival instincts kicking in. Like, we need to survive. It wasn't like, oh, if we fail, then we're going to look dumb. It's more like, oh my God, we can't keep up. We have to, it was a challenge. It was like this, we can't let it die, which is a different mentality than I think, it was more fear than greed.
Right.
That makes sense. And then on top of that, we had other challenges too. Like, okay, we bought ourselves some time. Rackspace ended up saying they would host us for free for 6 months, and then they gave us a half off for the next 3 months and then a quarter off for the next 3 months after that. So we bought some time, but we realized that it had to generate some revenue somehow in order to pay for itself. And frankly, at that time we were thinking, hey, we need to have it make more money so we can hire one person to run it so we can go back to doing our real things. Because we really didn't see that it would become a business at that point in time. So like I said, we were basically thinking more from a survival mentality than a greed mentality.
So then what's the, other than the affiliate fee with Ophoto, when did you essentially launch the dating service, which I guess was the bulk of your revenues?
Yeah, so the dating service launched about, I think, a couple months in. It was free at that point in time. And then we added payments a month after that. So I think 3 months after that, we had launched what we called Meet Me at Hot or Not. The website used to say, am I hot? Tell me, am I? And then it'd say hot or not. And the interface of the dating site was meant to be as similar as possible to the rating side of things. But so it said meet me at hot or not. And the joke was that meet me at would actually could be read meet, in that we were a virtual meat market.
Very clever.
But yeah, the idea was to create an interface that basically felt the same as rating 1 to 10. So we made it just saying yes or no, and kind of adopted a speed dating thing. And a month after we launched that, we added, we made it so after you matched with someone, in order to write them, one of you had to be a paid member. That was effectively the equivalent of saying, you clicked yes on a girl, she clicked yes back to you. That's kind of like walking into a girl and smiling at her, and she smiles back at you. And then at that point in time, someone has to buy drinks. And it's usually the guy.
So it's totally like the Tinder model, as you mentioned.
Tinder is pretty much exactly how Hot or Not worked, except Tinder was free from the get-go and has remained free. But actually, no, they're starting to charge for some premium functionalities. But anyway, yes, it was basically Tinder of the web, and Tinder is now Tinder of mobile.
Okay, so once you launched charging, how quickly did that grow? When did you start paying yourself out of the profits on Hot or Not?
We didn't actually start paying ourselves for another 2 years or so, but it's not entirely honest to say that, though, because we were the only people that owned it. We didn't raise any money, and when we turned on the payments, it instantly went to where we were each making, like 100 or 200 grand a year. Well, anyway, that first year, I think we did around 700 or 800,000 in revenue, and it was all profit because we had no cost structure at all.
Right.
Because we had done those deals. The real cost was really the bandwidth in those days, and so with the Yahoo deal not going away after that first year, the cost was not an issue. So it was pretty much, I think our net margin was 90 to 95%.
Unbelievable. It's the internet dream.
It was. We won a lottery ticket. We had a winning lottery ticket, but we paid ourselves like $40,000 or $50,000 a year, which was basically what I had made around the time coming out of college as an engineer. We didn't touch the money that we were making because we were never sure if we were going to need it as a company, so we didn't distribute it out. But it's a little disingenuous to say that we weren't making any money because we knew the money was there and it was ours. So, but actually, from a mental discipline standpoint, not having it in our personal bank accounts probably did help.
Now, were venture capitalists dying? Were they calling you constantly like, we have to invest in this, we got to scale up, blah, blah, blah?
We were getting a lot of calls, but to be honest, this was in October 2000, which you remember those days.
Yeah.
The sky was falling. we basically said any VC who wants to invest in this idea right now is an idiot, and we don't want him involved or her. So we actually only got contacted by male VCs. So actually, I'm not being sexist in saying, yeah, all of them, we didn't want him involved. And so, now in retrospect, maybe they weren't idiots, but at the time we thought they were. Because we were very gloom and doom, sky is falling at the time. So,
and yet your sky wasn't falling in the sense that you were showing that the internet does scale, and you could have 90% margins with a product that people find useful.
Yeah, we were, I guess, one of the first examples of, even to ourselves, of companies being able to be launched entirely bootstrapped on the web and reach some level of scale, right? Within 2 months, we had hit Net Nielsen's top 25 advertising domains because we had ads on there. And so, here we were. I think we were right next to ESPN at that time.
Wow.
And, we didn't have any money. We were in debt, and we didn't spend any money. And so it was pretty enlightening for us at that point to say, hey, this is probably the future, that people are going to be able to do this. And that we actually called it that the power would shift towards the entrepreneur and away from capital.
I'm just trying to figure out what makes this viral. You tapped into this thing that happens in the brain every single day, and you kind of moved it online. Yeah. And so people kind of automatically said, oh, yeah, that's how I think all day long, every day. And now I can do it here on our real site and look at, and there's this voyeuristic aspect. Like, voyeurism always works. Like, people sign on Facebook to stalk everyone.
Yeah, it's not, I guess if you talk to any of my friends back then, it wasn't really a surprise to any of my friends that that I was involved in this because I was a big reality TV show fan. I remember back then we used to watch this show called Blind Date.
Yeah, Dave Attell.
Yeah,
on Comedy Central.
Right, and Ricky Lake, Jenny Jones, Springer, in Real World, Road Rules, all these shows. We were big fans of them, and so. It was no surprise to our friends that we would be involved in, I guess, probably the first, I guess what you would call reality internet type of things. Because the interesting thing about Hot or Not at the time, from an intellectual standpoint, was that it was kind of the first place where voyeurs and exhibitionists, to some degree, at that time, the only people who submitted photos onto the web were submitting them to Ophoto and Shutterfly, and basically places where people were actually password protecting the photos. And so this notion of openly putting up all your most candid pictures for scrutiny was kind of new. I mean, blogs existed, but people were not really putting photos on blogs at the time, and certainly not for other people to judge. It was kind of the first of that wave, and so it was very interesting, I think, from an intellectual standpoint, from what it meant for the web in its next in the next generation of things to come.
And then, so things are moving along. You're making money as a dating site. There even were, how many people were meeting for dates and how many marriages were happening because of Hot or Not?
So there were about 500,000 monthly active users in the dating service. We looked into it one time. I think there was about 5 to 10 marriages a day.
A day? Yeah.
Well, if you think about the scale, that actually is not that amazing.
Right.
5 to 10 a day is 3,000 people. If you have 500,000 people, that's, over time that seems actually quite reasonable.
Did you get thank you letters and invitations?
Yeah, got invited to weddings, and some people I guess took longer to get married. Even last year, I got invited to a wedding. I actually spoke at Google to the Google Plus team a couple years ago, and someone on that team was like, "Hey, I met my wife or my fiance on your site." And he invited me to his wedding as well. So even now 15 years later, people are just getting married. So,
and it sort of shows Hot or Not quickly passed by probably a lot of dating sites because the reality is people want to know what you look like first. They don't care about all the details of the profile. That comes later.
That was actually the idea. We actually did quite a bit of thinking in how the product would work, and we saw ourselves as being a router. So we wanted to be the people router of the internet is how we kind of saw ourselves. And so, because we were a bunch of double E's, right? And so once we kind of took that paradigm into mind, we started thinking more about things like, routing efficiency. And kind of a quite geeky way of looking at it. But, in a marketplace, you need liquidity is more important than anything. If you have no liquidity, you have nothing, right? And so from a marketplace standpoint, we said, well, like you said, because the most important thing to a relationship, at least as a first pass filter, is attractiveness. And attractiveness is subjective. It would be a more efficient router if we got rid of that first and then let them take it from there, right?
That's an interesting way to look at it.
If you wanted a smart and attractive person, let's say you want the ideal, you were searching for a beauty model who was also a PhD, right? It's easier to go to MIT and then just look for the hot one real fast than it is to go to a beauty pageant and search out the one who has a PhD.
Right.
There are different modes in which you can attack the problem that create different levels of efficiency. And so for us, we figured that the shotgun approach initially as a first pass filter was probably the most efficient and also more fun. That's why Hot or Not was more efficient than Smart or Not in retaining users.
Absolutely. I had no users and shut it down almost instantly. My 6-year-old daughter actually came up to me and said, isn't this mean what you're doing, like with the Smart or Not? So I just shut it down. So you built up, and from what I was reading, you had about $5.5 million in revenues or profits or something, and then you sold for about $20 million, give or take.
Well, we got it actually up to around over $7 million. I think it was a run rate of around 7.5 or some to 7.5 million. By that point in time, we had actually hired some employees. Like we had like small crew of guys because my partner Jim at one point started riding motorcycles, and I was a little concerned about what would happen if he got in an accident to the business. And so we agreed that we should hire people for redundancy and also for our laziness. So we got it up to doing about $6 million in EBITDA. And then you're right, we did sell it in the 20s, which was rather low, but it was we also did it. When did we sell it? We sold it in February of 2008. So
right.
You remember that time. It's kind of interesting. We were bookended by the 2000 crash and by the 2008 crash.
You went from bust to bust.
We went from bust to bust. And so in summer of 2007, you could start seeing the housing market start to implode a little bit on the mortgages. We were a little concerned about that. And so I guess around November of 2007, I went all to cash, like in my portfolio. And I guess we kind of took that to an extreme and said, we just need to liquidate and go to cash. And that included Hot or Not. And so we ended up selling it, like I said, at a pretty low multiple. But at the time, we were like, we just have to go to cash.
Well, it's interesting because I remember reading about it practically the day you sold it, and some of the numbers were revealed. And it seemed to me like you were the only internet company that sold on a multiple of earnings. Like,
yeah.
Like, do you think if you held out a little bit or hired a banker or shopped it around, you could have gotten more like 100 or more?
Yeah, probably could have. But to be honest with you, at that time, there are multiple things going on. I mean, that was one factor, was the we just need to get out. But actually, the bigger factor at the time was that so what I didn't tell you is that along the way we wanted to, because we had realized that people were going to be able to make more money, that the leverage was going to the entrepreneur. Jim and I wanted to start an incubator. Our first project was going to be a social network with some media sharing capabilities on top. And the guys that were going to join us were Steve Chen from YouTube and Mike Solomon, who was YouTube's first engineer. It didn't end up working out because we had someone on our board who was didn't see eye to eye with us. We thought that this in this new incubator model, the employees should get 50 to 60% of the company, and he had it more in mind of them getting 2. Because it's an older style of thinking back when capital was in power and not the entrepreneur. And so it didn't work out. But subsequently, we saw YouTube happen. And like I said, we were friends with those guys. So to some degree, we saw Hot or Not as potentially being an opportunity cost issue. Now, we didn't really see what was going to happen on mobile at the time in terms of Tinder and that. So in many ways, we made a mistake on that, in that it was potentially $1 billion play. But we had run it for 8 years, and frankly, the other factor is that we were just tired of it.
Well, and also, it's never a mistake to take 10 million plus off the table.
Right? No, that's true. Like I'm not crying about it.
Yes.
I'm quite happy and feel lucky and blessed. That the entire thing even happened to me. So no, don't get me wrong. I'm not complaining about it, but just speaking of it in retrospect, from a financial standpoint, yeah, it probably could have made us more money had we held out, had we gone through more process, had we tried to convert it into Tinder or whatnot. But that's the way it goes. And you just move on to your next thing. So we're not really bothered by it.
What if I'm listening and I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm so jealous. I want to do something like this. What would you suggest to somebody who wanted to kind of come up with an idea that has the same sort of viralness? I mean, if there was a formula, obviously you would do it and everybody would do it. But what would be some first tips?
The number one tip would be to just do it, for one. I mean, so I think a lot of people have good ideas, but just never get off their duff to actually building it. And many things start off quite simply. So it's not, even if you have a vision of this complex product in the long run, I would say start off with the simplest elements of it. Because at its core, most things that are interesting or edgy or get passed around are not interesting because they're complicated. They're interesting because they're so simple. At its core, most products don't actually have to be that complex when they're built out. So,
like take Hot or Not as an example. What percentage would you say the initial Hot or Not was in terms of feature set from the final Hot or Not?
We never changed the Hot or Not. So we are actually pretty adamant about not changing the interface of Hot or Not because we felt like it worked and it was so simple that it was almost like anything that we would do to it would complicate it, and so we didn't. So in the very beginning, the rating part, how it was in the beginning was pretty much how it was in the end. We did add this dating element to it, the meet me part. That part we kind of, it was actually almost felt like a separate site in that there were two worlds. There was the site where you would rate people and there was a site where you would meet people. And the only bridge was that sometimes when you were rating people, it would have a link on it that said click here to meet me if that person happened to be in both worlds.
I see. So then it would move you kind of almost to the dating site.
It was almost like a parallel universe where instead of just rating people, now this world was about meeting people. But everything else the interface actually was almost exactly the same. And we tried to keep things, as simple as possible. And I found that in all my experience with all my investments and with Hot or Not and other things I've done, that simple is always better. The more you make people think, the worse it's going to be. Also, if it's working, be very careful about fixing it, because if it's not simpler or at least still very simple, then you have a very high likelihood of actually messing things up. and you see that with a lot of sites. I mean, not only because things get harder, but also because people are used to something. People don't like change, and so you actually run the risk of alienating your user base by making changes, major changes, without input and too quickly.
I agree with that. So many sites, I think, fall apart after their quote-unquote redesign.
Right. And some sites have done a better job of handling it by letting people switch back and forth or introducing it to people optionally, to give people time. Because I think, even if you had a good interface, people just don't like change a lot of the time. And so you have to ease them into it.
So now you do quite a bit of angel investing. Based on your experience from Hot or Not, what do you look for in a good company that you would consider putting money into?
The first thing that I care about is the founders and whether or not I like them, whether I get along with them, whether I think they're smart. There's a class of person who thinks about everything at a meta level. So when we were looking at Hot or Not, we were looking at it at a meta level from a system level to say, not just from a user level standpoint, but from a system standpoint of saying, some people said, why can't I write comments on people? And we're like, well, that would create some mean comments, which other users would see and would scare them off from submitting their picture, right? And so there's a whole system view of things, right? So I kind of look for people who have kind of a system level view of everything, including themselves. Why? And look, I read your stuff, James, and I think you're a great writer, and I know you're like that.
Thank you.
Very introspective, why do I do this? Why do I behave this way? Being able to separate the intellectual observation from your own ego to say, I do this because, whatever. Kind of having that ability to look at users as, to model them and to understand how they work and to understand human motivation, understand human psychology. I think those are very important things that some people have and some people don't. I think it can be developed, actually. Funny thing is, with all my employees, whenever they joined, I used to give them Cialdini's Influence book.
Oh yeah, great book.
I made some of my employees read The Game.
Yeah, Neil Strauss.
The artist, yeah, Neil Strauss. And in fact, actually, we used to make them go out and get numbers or something, because I actually feel like these skills actually apply to product design a lot. It's just understanding people and being able to think about things in a kind of academic way is actually very important.
What Hot or Not did was you removed, to some extent, the gatekeeper on dating. So no longer did you have to go to a location to meet somebody of the opposite sex. This was like basically the real internet dating had been around for a while, but I think this was the beginning of the explosion of it. Right away, you see the person, you can decide if you meet them or not, and without any kind of resistance or friction in the middle.
Right. People router.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Be as efficient as possible. I used to go to bars back then, but I also used to hang out a lot on Excite on their voice chat. They had basically the chat rooms, which don't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
And it was fun, you got to meet a lot of people very quickly. And it's definitely changing how we date. There's definitely more flow.
Now,
so.
I noticed that you did a kind of a voter registration effort of Vote or Not.
Yeah.
Could you have used the Hot or Not idea for just simply voting for candidates? Like, given all the problems with voting, ever since 2000, can't we just vote for candidates using a kind of...
Actually, there was a book about this. I'm trying to remember the name. But, after the 2004 election, some academic wrote a book about voting systems. And he actually talked about Hot or Not as being an example of a different system where there are a lot of different ways you can vote for something, different structural systems. And Hot or Not is definitely one of them. The notion of crowdsourcing answers, that was actually one of the things that we were pretty proud about. Even though the topic seems so silly to many people, even though Hot or Not as a concept was so silly, many of the smartest people you would ever meet were actually the most fascinated by it.
Yeah, because there's a data component too. It's almost like how OkCupid kind of analyzes the data of their people.
Yeah. We always talked about doing OkCupid type of stuff. And we just never hired a data analyst to do that. So we did run some funny ones. We proved that gay men were not hotter than straight men. And
I would not expect that.
Yeah, we didn't expect it either. We were very surprised because the hypothesis was that they would definitely be hotter, but they weren't. We even actually we were involved in a psychology paper that was actually published with Dan Ariely. I don't know Dan from Predictably.
Yeah. Dan's been on my podcast.
Oh yeah, perfect. So him and some other gentlemen, folks out there. The very first thing that we did when we built Hot or Not, when you submitted your photo, we asked you how hot you thought you were, and because we wanted to do we had read that smart people don't think they're smart and dumb people think they're smart, and so we wanted to kind of do the equivalent with with beauty. It was later pointed out to me that it's always that way for anything because you just have reversion to the mean. Everyone is going to, on average, be average if we have a normal curve. So, of course, the people who are hot don't think they're hot, and the people who hot. Anyway, but
what surprised you about who got the most votes for hot?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Basically nothing.
Like basically the people you expected to be hot got all nines.
Yeah, 6-pack on a guy, you can add a few points. Blonde, add a point. There was nothing really that revealing about who got hot scores on average. I guess the most interesting thing to me that I learned was more about the variance than the mean. Well, first of all, here's some interesting things. It was easier to rate women quickly. Like people rated women quicker than they would rate men.
Huh.
I think that's because we're trained by society to know what is good looking. Based on with women in particular more than for men. We did prove that looks were actually subjective at a micro level. Like many people did actually disagree on what was hot and what was not. As an average, it was always a normal bell curve. But on some people, you would have quite a variance, or even sometimes like bimodal distributions.
And who would get the most dates? Would it be people who everybody agreed on, or people with the highest variance?
Probably the people who are the most aggressive.
Huh.
One time I shaved my head, and I thought, everyone's going to be scared of me. No one's going to want to talk to me when I was going backpacking around the world at the time. And what I found was actually I was right and I was wrong. A lot of people wouldn't talk to me, but the ones who liked guys who had no hair really came on strong. I guess it's just making the point that, like, more than anything, differentiation is what matters.
So it's almost like filters matter.
Yes.
So it's almost like how copywriting works.
Process. There's no absolute. The problem is if I have a bald head, I have to find the girls who like bald heads. It's not easy to find that. But with high liquidity, with high pass through, they'll find me. It's just a matter of differentiating yourself in some way, shape, or form. It's basically peacocking. You have your peacock, and then you have to like get seen by girls. The more girls that see you, the more successful you'll be at meeting them, and then the more successful you are at meeting them, the more likely you'll go out with them, and then so on. Right? It's a funnel. So,
and Jim, your partner, did he meet his wife on Hot or Not?
I don't think he met her on Hot or Not. He met her at our Hot or Not 5-year anniversary party.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks to Hot or Not.
How did you meet your wife?
I met my wife in Shanghai originally through friends of friends, and there she is. I actually have to run soon. I'm on baby duty now.
Okay. Well, I will let you get to baby duty, but thank you so much, James. Is there anything you're working on that you want to give a shout out to, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a pet project right now I'm working on called Keiki, which is it's a YouTube viewer for kids that I've been building as a hobby for the last year. There is now a YouTube for kids app that YouTube launched, but it's actually quite different. So anyway, if anyone has kids, give it a shot.
Keikey. I can get it in the Apple Store and the Google Store and all that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, James, thanks so much for spending the time, and it was a great education. I was a big fan of Hot or Not, so it's glad to talk to you.
Well, thanks. I was glad to talk to you. I'm a big fan of your writing. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Talk to you soon.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
The McNugget Buddies are back. But this time, they got a fresh look as part of the new Kerwin Frost box at McDonald's. We're talking all new buddies, dressed head to toe in the freshest fits, all designed by the artist Kerwin Frost. So when you order the Kerwin Frost box with your choice of 10-piece McNuggets or a Big Mac, you'll get one of the flyest McNugget Buddies to go with it. Think you can collect them all? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm loving it.
At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last.